This is The Hypothesis, the show where industry experts debate and discuss growth marketing approaches, digital advertising tactics, measurement plans, as well as creative and growth strategies.
Hi, I'm Phil Ware, VP of Strategy at Thrive Digital.
And I'm Eric Sloan, VP of Data and Strategy at Thrive Digital.
And I'm your moderator, lay marketer, and asker of clarifying questions, Santana Blanchett. Hi, friends, and welcome to another episode of The Hypothesis. Today's hypothesis is that automated campaigns take advantage of busy marketers. So let's start with some definitions. First of all, I would love to know how you would define an automated campaign, and I would really specifically love some clarity on where automation factors in and then where the humans are doing the work. So talk to me about that.
It's an interesting one, right? I think automated campaigns have taken so many different shapes over the years. So automated campaigns have almost changed in terms of what their definition is. But at the highest level, when you can think of an automated campaign, it's ultimately some form of machine learning, AI-driven technology that's taking some of the heavy lifting away from users, away from the marketers themselves. That could be in the form of automated bidding that we've had on Google search for years and years and years at this point, or it can be some of the newer iterations of that where we've got more full-blown automation when it comes to Performance Max or Advantage Plus shopping campaigns that kind of take everything away from the marketer, as far as targeting, as far as placements, bidding, etc., and really allows for the marketer to step back and allow their platform to take control. So at a very high level, that's kind of how I would outline it.
Yeah, like the two buckets that I put automated campaigns into are automating production work. So can we automate something that we have to do manually? And that could mean ad copy, it could mean creative, it could mean, campaign structures and all of those kinds of things, like delivery across different networks, etc. And then the second category is automating the optimization itself. So, who are we targeting? Who are we serving this ad to? All of that kind of stuff. And I think the big rise in automated campaigns has really come from the fact that as humans, we're sort of looking at a few of the levers that we can pull in terms of campaign settings, campaign targeting, all of that. But the reality is that all of those signals that we're looking at, all of those levers that we're pulling from a targeting standpoint, just aren't as effective as the hundreds of signals that all of the ad platforms actually have. So, the browsing history of a user factors into, targeting more so probably than, just like a broad interest that you can set up inside the campaign or something like that. And so that's really how I see it, is like we have these two broad categories. And probably I would say that the optimization side, so the campaigns that are using automation to optimize bids, optimize targeting, etc., that's the most popular type of automated campaign right now, mostly because marketers love control. And so we haven't really caught on to that campaign style of just like handing over the keys to Google or Meta completely. We haven't quite gotten there yet.
But I'd certainly say it's on the rise. Like the amount of advertisers that I see leaning into Performance Max or leaning into Advantage Plus is increasing. And the same goes with the ad platforms themselves shepherding advertisers to go to those specific campaign types. And that's where the future of those platforms is. I personally think, or that's where the advertisers are going to be led to believe that that's where the future is. So yeah, it's a really interesting future that I think we're moving into.
And I think that's where the hypothesis for this episode comes from, though, is that these types of campaigns are taking advantage of marketers who are busy people and, may not know the best way to get the best efficiency out of every campaign. And so it's very tempting to look at this campaign type and say, hey, like, just give us a couple of URLs and some creative and we'll kind of do the rest, right? We'll figure out targeting, we'll figure out distribution, we'll figure out, the networks that drive results and all of that. And I think my problem with all of that is it's a black box. We don't know how those decisions are being made in terms of like who is actually getting this creative Why is the creative being served to these various different segments of your target market, et cetera? And I think that loss of control is going to bite us as an industry in the butt, like down the road, because we're going to end up in a place where we've lost that sort of tactile feel for the market.
It's analogous to what's happening with cookie deprecation and the reckoning that's come forward with the industry around the loss of real, I guess, tangible conversion tracking. And now there's this big uncertainty around what is actually a conversion and what is incremental and what's not. It almost feels like we're moving through a similar moment, but trying to understand what is in those black boxes and advertisers suddenly being like, I don't actually know where Google or Meta is spending my ad dollars within this specific campaign type. And there's some unease that comes with that. And there's a lot of caveats that I think get added to that conversation where people just don't necessarily understand where that ad budget is moving to and what impact it's having on the broader brand. So yeah, it's interesting times.
Yeah.
And can the machines be trusted to report upon themselves, right? Like, at least when you were controlling all the factors, you could say, this keyword isn't working for me, or obviously I'm not a performance marketer, so I'm not saying this very accurately, but back in the day, you could say, I did this thing and it didn't perform, ergo, that's not working. But if you give it all to the machine, all to the platform, can it be trusted to report upon its own effectiveness and the thing that it determined you wanted?
Yeah, I think that can go for a lot of different campaign types, not even just the automated ones. But yeah, I think it opens up a lot of opportunity for advertisers who are not necessarily like wanting to be curious about what's going on in those campaigns to look at the face value results that are coming from those automated campaigns and check mark, it's working great this month, I'm going to move on and start testing something else, without really thinking about, well, what types of users are being addressed with that campaign, what types of creative should I be putting into that campaign. And it's almost a very easy way to just say it's being handled by the ad platforms that are much more powerful as far as AI goes and ML goes around trying to find the right source of user. But there's still things that advertisers can do, in my mind, to try and make those automated campaigns work better for you. So yeah, I think there's certainly some areas there that we can talk more about today, but also dive into trying to understand why people fall into that trap of thinking that those campaigns are really working for them.
Before we dive headlong into that, because I do think it's definitely worth talking about that, I would love to know, how are marketers currently using automated campaigns, and contrast it for me with what they were doing before. Like, what was the air quotes analog way or the before way, and what is the automated way?
I sort of see it as a mix, right? And it's like not something that was just like a light switch that happened, right? It's been a slow sort of progression in the industry from everything being manual to I think eCPC, for example, was like one of the first automations in search where you could set a bid, but it wasn't really a true auction anymore. Google was using multiple signals in order to actually determine the bid that you're in, right? And so like this was the start of automated bidding. And we go further and further down the path, and so like bidding is almost completely automated now, and manual bidding is very, very rare, I would say, in terms of search advertising, depending on the campaign type and such. But now we've gotten to this stage where you can just essentially upload a landing page or even a website, and Google can essentially create the entire campaign for you. And so I think the way that marketers are using it today is a bit of a mixed bag, right? And it depends on sophistication. It depends on how big the media program is and how complex that media program is, because if you are running 7 different channels, then yeah, maybe you want to automate all of your Google distribution through something like PMax or something like that. But if you're really heavily focused on a search program or something like that, then typically we see less automation in those types of campaigns, and there's really a lot of that micromanaging that we might have seen 5 years ago in those types of campaigns. That's what I'm seeing right now.
Phil, I would love for you to get a little bit more succinct for me. How are you seeing clients and people in the industry that you're talking to using automation right now?
2 main ways, I'd say. One, optimization. So they're using automation to optimize their campaigns, be that via automated bidding or open targeting within Meta campaigns, and really just giving some of that control over to method to find the right sorts of audience. And the second piece would be really kind of handing the keys over to the ad platforms themselves. So really utilizing some of these new campaign types for end-to-end control of how that budget is being utilized. Targeting, creative, just two of those main examples, and really having that end-to-end control be given to the ad platform itself to try and find the right sorts of user. So those would be like two main types that I see. There is obviously loads of other automation that you could try and push into accounts from a hygiene standpoint, creative optimization standpoint, etc. But the main two that I see when it comes to campaigns specifically would be optimization and that end-to-end control.
The most prevalent and often most overlooked or like not thought deeply enough part of automated campaigns is this idea of optimizing towards a user behavior. And I think as an industry, we've gotten into this habit of every campaign has to optimize towards something, right? And so, bottom of funnel is optimizing towards purchase. That's a given. That makes sense, right? And you want more purchases, you're going to have the sort of bottom of funnel campaigns drive as many purchases as you can. As you move further up the funnel, though, you start to get these kind of less certain optimizations, right? And so you'll be optimizing in an e-commerce case. Maybe you're optimizing for add to cart or a product page view. Maybe you go even further and you're just optimizing for a landing page view. So just getting someone to click. I think that's the part that we as an industry need to think more deeply about is what types of signals are we optimizing towards? Because it's really easy to get landing page views. It's really easy to get traffic, but the quality of that traffic is then in question in my eyes. And we're not necessarily driving the right people, the right traffic in the right context. And so I think that's where automation we just need to think a little bit harder about the signals that we give to that machine learning algorithm in order to optimize our campaigns.
This is very much why I think that today's hypothesis was about automated campaigns taking advantage of busy marketers, because I think it's almost like trusting an employee, right? Like, you're busy, so you hire someone to take over a piece of the work that you do, and you think that if you bring on the right person and you give them the right training, then you can trust them to take a task and run with it. But when you give that to the automation, you give those tools, there's so many like inflammatory headlines right now about all these things that AI and automation can do. The level of trust that I think folks are having, because marketers are getting busier and busier all the time, having to learn new channels. It's almost like they're being sold a bit of a false promise about what it can perform. And then the metrics that the platforms are giving them, of course, reflect that everything's going hunky-dory, but that's not necessarily the case, right? So how have you seen some false promises around automated campaigns and AI?
The first thing that jumps out at me is that machine learning doesn't have judgment, right? And so if you tell it, hey, I want more people to add to cart, it's going to go find more people that are going to add to cart, right? And those could be bots. Those could be people who have no intention of buying. Those could be people who perpetually add to cart and never make a purchase because they're just window shopping online or something like that. There's no judgment there, right? If you give it a signal, if you give the optimization algorithm a signal, it's going to go and very effectively find more of that signal. The other thing to remember, though, is that when you optimize towards something, you're also inherently optimizing away from something else. And so if you optimize for purchases or add to carts or product page views or leads or something like that, if the optimization algorithm can't see the eventual conversion, you're actually optimizing away from those people that made that conversion. And this is the problem that I have with applying this sort of automated campaign style to upper mid funnel, where you're optimizing towards 2+ page views or something like that, because you're optimizing towards a behavior that may actually end up optimizing you away from anyone who saw the ad and then went and took action on a different device, right? And in the middle and top of funnel, you certainly have a lot of view through conversions, people who are not clicking on your ad in the feed, but instead they're going to a different device and taking some action. Maybe they're even making a purchase. You're actually optimizing away from those people because the signal is just not being sent to the optimization algorithm, right? And so I think that that's a real problem with this kind of entrenched idea that we have to optimize towards some kind of action no matter what.
And I think the challenge I'd have to that would essentially be, well, how could you utilize those automated campaigns for anything beyond, I'll say bottom of funnel, or like that really trying to capture that user intent? Where do you see that going, Eric? Like there's a huge amount of budget that is spent on that kind of intent generation, top of funnel, mid funnel, if you will. How do you utilize these campaigns for those audiences that are trying to get people into that funnel and start considering your product? Is there a play there, or should advertisers just be ignoring things like PMAX and ASC for that?
Well, certainly don't ignore PMAX. These algorithms are very sophisticated and they're very good at getting more of what you want them to get more of, right? And so if you say, hey, I want to get more purchases, or I want to get more people to add to cart because I don't have enough purchase volume or something like that, those campaigns are very effective at driving that value. Just put them in their place. Realize when you've saturated the opportunity that exists in that campaign type. So get as much as you can out of them and then move on to something else. Like think bigger than just, hey, I need to run a PMAX campaign for 80% of my budget or something like that. Think about, hey, how do I extract the most value out of this PMAX product while spending the least amount that I can, right? So you're trying to find the ideal position on that curve of diminishing return, and then move on to different marketing tactics to sort of fill in the rest, right? And I think that as performance marketers, we've really forgotten about things like reach campaigns and sort of going after the target market in a mass marketing way. And those tactics can be very, very effective at driving full funnel performance, right? And so you're going to see your organic traffic get better. You're going to see your direct traffic get better, all of those things. But as performance marketers, we just look at the fact that there's no direct attribution and we're like, oh, hey, this is not working, right? And so I think that that's what we have to do is put these automated campaigns in their place. PMAX is a great product, but just don't push it too far, right? Don't expect too much out of it.
That makes sense. It's an interesting answer, because you would generally think of PMAX as being, I'll say bottom to mid, if you will. It has performance in the name, so like it's got to be more bottom of funnel. But the whole concept around not trying to target like a smaller conversion or a predictive conversion in those campaigns is an interesting one, because there are users who are going to perform those actions. Let's say a 2+ page view within a PMAX campaign at the top of funnel, who may turn out to be a conversion down the road. But as you said, it's kind of a walled garden. Like the algorithm in and of itself doesn't see which of those 2+ page view users actually does turn into a purchaser, and nor does it care if it's just trying to optimize for that single event. So yeah, it's a really interesting way of thinking about it, Eric. Thank you for sharing that.
You look at the mechanics of getting someone to your website and 2+ page view, for example, right? And so part of the mechanics of that is that you need to increase click-through rate, let's say, right? Because you want more traffic in. So if you're optimizing for, let's say, just landing page views, then the algorithm is going to find people who tend to click, right? And people who tend to click are not necessarily high quality consumers that you want to have on your website that will eventually turn into a customer, right? And we sort of, contort ourselves into a pretzel, thinking like, oh, hey, well, if they're clicking, then they must have had interest in the ad creative. And if they had interest in the ad creative, then they must be qualified in some way. I'm just not buying it, right? And I was actually reading some research recently, we can put it in the show notes, just about how correlated click-through rate is with actual consumer behavior, so actual purchases. And there's really no correlation whatsoever, right? And so it's one of these things where if we try to stretch our understanding of a metric like click-through rate or landing page views or 2+ page views or something, and we try to make that connection and say, this is directly causing consumer behavior to change, I think that's where we go wrong, right? And that's a giant leap. At the very least, it should be tested. I'm always an advocate for testing, of course, but we need to test those assumptions. And I think that particular assumption is something that marketers don't think about enough.
The other thing that I'm curious about is if you've gone and done work to figure out determining a KPI that is predictive of whatever down funnel event that you want to try and target, be that a purchase, be that a high value lead that's signing up. If you figured out that there is a very specific conversion action that happens in high enough volume, let's say it's a 2+ page view, but of very specific pages, is that a valuable KPI to get PMAX to target in one of these instances? Or does that still fall into that same trap, Eric? Like, you've done your homework to figure out it's predictive. Is there something that breaks down there?
It becomes a valuable test, right? Because what you've just explained is that you've done some type of analysis and you've determined that some type of user behavior is correlated with purchases, right? And so one of the ways that we test that, for example, is with a delay, right? And so you can run a correlation and say on the same day, if 2+ page views go up, then purchases go up, then these two metrics must be related in some way. But that's just same day correlation. And I'm not sure that that's really capturing what you're trying to do. So what we do instead is we think about adding a delay there, right? And so we say, is 2+ page views actually predicting a higher amount of purchases in the future? So when 2+ page views goes up, are we actually getting more purchases, let's say 15 or 30 days down the road, right? And so that we start to get to a more causal place in that case, right? Because we're disconnecting the sort of same day where 2+ page views and purchases could easily be correlated in the same day just because of promotions or something like that, right? It's sort of self-fulfilling.
Right.
And so even with that analysis though, I would say we take that and we say, this is really interesting. These two metrics seem to be related in some way. Now let's go and test it, right? And let's see what the actual impact of optimizing towards 2+ page views or lifting that metric. Let's see what that impact is actually having on purchases, right? And there's various ways to do that, but I think that would be the way. So it's that analysis is just a way, it's an engine to generate testing ideas as opposed to running with those assumptions.
Really interesting.
How can we be running better automated campaigns? And I want to get more specific within that question and say, how can we be running better automated campaigns? And how can we provide better inputs for the automated campaigns to be better?
Yeah, I can summarize that into kind of 3 main buckets around how we could be thinking about making automated campaigns better for us. First one is, what are we feeding the algorithm? Garbage in, garbage out is kind of one of the ways I think about it, is if you're feeding the algorithm, feeding PMAX in whatever case it may be, a bad metric that might not be correct or is broken or have the wrong value, it's just going to generate garbage results for you. So if you're trying to get purchases, let's say, but you're optimizing it for any old person to come onto the website, it's probably not going to perform for you, because it's just going to get the person to click onto the website, and that's going to be a success metric, and it's going to drive more and more and more of that, thinking it's successful when you're instead not feeding it what it deserves. The other piece is, are those campaigns actually providing value? So that's the second point that I touch on. When was the last time you thought about the diminishing returns of each one of those different campaigns, or the true incrementality of a Performance Max or ASC campaign? And the last one would be, how many of those users coming through those campaigns are returning or new? So are those Performance Max or ASC campaigns in this case actually driving net new users for you? Or is it just basically an expensive retargeting tactic? There's settings in the campaigns themselves to set that up, but still it's not perfect. And there are some ways for people to slip through the net in our privacy focused world. So, to summarize, the 3 things I'd say people could be doing better is feed better signal to the algorithm, really think about the value that channel is providing or campaign is providing. And then lastly, how many new users are actually being driven through those campaigns, and are they truly acquisition?
I just want to touch on this point because the campaign settings bit, we haven't really talked about that too much, but that is really one of the ways that automated campaigns take advantage of marketers who are not watching this, right? And so PMAX is a real classic one because by default, it's going to pick up branded search. By default, it's going to pick up your retargeting and all of that, right? And so the original switch was sort of, hey, this product is better than shopping, right? So test it against your shopping campaigns kind of thing, right? And the problem with that is that PMAX was then going out and serving a display ad in front of all of the people that were ready to buy today. And it was going out and, serving ads on your branded search terms and all of those kinds of things. And when you just look at face value, of course, the return on ad spend in your attribution report is going to be way higher, because all of this sort of leakage from your other campaign types has then gone into that campaign type, right? And so, on the surface, you might look at that and be like, oh, hey, this is like twice as good, so let's just turn everything else off. But on the aggregate, when you start blending everything together, it's kind of similar, right? And when we run incrementality tests, there's some mixed results there too, right? And sometimes it performs really well, sometimes it performs poorly in comparison to other campaign types, right? And so I think that, at least for me, the biggest thing is just to think deeply about anytime you're running one of these automated campaigns, what is the signal that we're giving to the platform? Is that signal the right signal that we actually want to be getting more of? Are there nuances to where these automated campaigns are serving the ads, and are they just kind of moving the conversions around from other campaign types?
One point I want to contribute here too, I come from a brand and creative background, and what you're talking about with having a lot of reconversions and hitting the same target audience is a fear that I have about automation that I've seen in human form that I think automation expediates, which is homogeny of ideas. I think, like, I've been in rooms before where you see a whole creative team is exclusively one demographic, right? You've got all, men of a certain age, let's say, and then the product ends up, all of the advertising around it ends up really targeting to that demographic because that's their lived experience and that's what they see. And so you just target this one demographic. And I think that can happen as well with automation and AI, right? Where they see it performing really well with one certain demographic, but it actually might have uses elsewhere, but they have no historical data to suggest that. So all they're targeting is one specific area, right? And I do worry about the lack of diversity in planning. I think that can be dangerous from like a business and an ethical perspective.
Yeah, and I think where things get interesting when you pivot that kind of idea and concept back into the performance marketing world is, well, what's the creative in these black box campaigns? Like, that can really be the differentiator in some of these working or not. So if we are moving into a world where things are more and more homogenous, and like people are using PMAX more and more prevalently or ASC more prevalently, what do the assets look like within those campaigns to make your brand stand out? And kind of goes back to old school marketing, if you will. Like, what's your USP? Like, why are you different? What does your product solve for your specific audience? And when you think about the things that marketers could be doing better in that space, it's really taking more care with that and thinking more clearly around what does that creative and positioning need to look like around products. Because at the end of the day, all that we're doing is buying attention from people and impressions from people. And it's what does that creative do when you put that impression in front of that person? That's what matters. So while we're talking about all the kind of technical nuance of all of this, I don't want that creative piece to get lost, because again, it can very much do with all the bells and whistles of these automated campaigns and thinking about the signal and thinking about how we're breaking down incrementality testing, etc. But creative is really one of those other big levers within these more automated campaigns that can be a bigger focus for people, I think.
Hear.
Also, brand safety. Like, honestly, brand safety, like leaving your copy and creative to automated tools. And that goes for generative AI, that goes for DALL-E, that goes for any of the tools that generate creative and copy automatically. You need to have a heavy eye reviewing that, because you are risking brand safety. And let me tell you, crisis comms, it ain't cheap.
No, I'm sure.
Right.
And again, linking that back to performance marketing world, it's fascinating when you see things like dynamic search ads, again, becoming more and more of a tactic that people use. I would say they're not necessarily like the main search campaign set that I would lean on to like run a search campaign, but they do have a very clear value in my mind as a catch-all that sits under your main search campaigns. The trick there, though, is that a lot of that is automated copy. that gets created. And I've seen that go very wrong in the past because Google is picking up on something on the website that maybe it shouldn't have been. And then you got to think about, well, why was it on the website in the first place? And all that sort of stuff. But nonetheless, you do have to be very careful with any of that creative that is produced via AI, or any of the other tools that are available, because it hasn't had that same level of critique, and there can be thousands of different iterations of the same sentence or the same copy that a human would take a long time to produce, and they would be a great outcome if a human produced it because it would be aligned with the brand, you'd hope. But if it's done by AI, a few in those thousands are probably going to be problematic. So brands should be very much on the watch out for those.
The last thing I would say on this question of, essentially over investing in a segment, because that segment of your target market converts better, and so these campaigns might optimize towards this really small segment, and then you're not hitting your entire target market. I think for me, that I come back to this idea of make these automated campaigns do as well as they can, and then stop and don't push them past that point, right? And so get a really good return, sort of skim the cream off the top, so to speak, right? You're getting all of the consumers that are in market to buy in a relatively short order, right? And so those automated campaigns are really, really good at that. And then go to different campaign types, right? Go to generating content and promoting that content, go to reach-based campaigns, go to these campaigns that are going to make the entire ecosystem around your brand better. They're going to drive organic search. They're going to drive direct traffic to your website. They're going to do all of these things that are harder to measure. But at the same time, they're going to make the health of your brand and the health of your organization much stronger over the long term, right? And so, yeah, I just think that, yes, that can absolutely happen. You can have these automated campaigns sort of focus in too much on one segment of your target market and kind of forget about the rest. But that's okay, because all you're trying to do is get all of the people who are in market, who have a high propensity of purchase in the short term, and then move on to other tactics to actually grow the business.
The summary I'd give there is they should not be ignored. Yes, there are some pitfalls and there are some things to be aware of, but it's probably the future is more and more of these sorts of campaigns. So yes, there are things to watch out for, but now is the time to start testing and wrapping your head around how these campaigns can serve a part of your marketing mix versus just being these are too scary, I'm not going to touch them. Because I think then you stand the risk of being left behind as the industry learns and evolves how to use these tools. And change has been constant. In my 10 years in the industry, it's been nothing but change. And there are always new campaign types, always new technology. And there was a time where you would kind of turn your nose up at automated bidding on search and be like, oh, I think I could do that better. And sometimes you could. But there was then the realization that I personally had that was, no, I can't. I'm going to hand the keys over to Google here and just say, if you were able to generate better results for, XYZ client, that's a no-brainer for me. It allows me to be more strategic on other areas of the account and not do multiple bid changes a week. That has value to me personally. So making sure that you're critically thinking about these campaigns and really starting to test them, I think would be my only kind of advice or words of wisdom, if you will, on these campaign types.
Yeah, there was really those two thresholds in probably the last 8 years, I want to say. The first one was automated bidding, of course, as you mentioned. I would say when automated bidding came out, we were probably better at managing bids, right? If you had your bid sheet and you were uploading new bid changes all the time and all of that, you were probably just marginally better than automated bidding at the time. But that very quickly changed, right? And within 6 or 12 months, we very quickly saw that automated bidding was outperforming the what we thought at the time to be a sophisticated way of managing bids on eCPC or even complete manual bidding, right? And the same thing happened with targeting, where there was this sort of hyper micromanagement of targeting, where you would target every device, and you would target various different interests and lookalikes and all of that kind of stuff, and you would have this very micromanaged campaign structure. And I remember the first time that I sort of tested that campaign structure against a campaign that was very, very broad, and it was targeting probably half the United States or something like that. And the very broad targeting outperformed, the other campaign types. And that's just because those optimization algorithms had reached a point where they were just much better than the micromanaging approach, right? And they needed the data, they needed the large audience in order to perform really well. And so those were two major leaps, I think, in the sort of automation side of our industry. And I think the next major leap is sort of this kind of PMax style, right? And there's a lot of skepticism right now. I think that's going to go away as Google continues to get better. Of course, Meta has their version as well. And those campaign types are going to be standard as well. I would agree. I also think we need to keep them in their place, right? And not have them take over the entire marketing program or the entire ads program.
Mm-hmm. Final question. I don't know how you're going to answer this, but here we are. What else are we going to see automated in performance marketing 5 years from now?
Well, I mean, I've maintained for a while now that the writing is on the wall for keywords. We're not going to have keyword targeting, and especially with AI generated search results and all of that, it's going to happen relatively soon, right? And so I remember a point a number of years ago when Google switched their focus in how they were talking about keywords to they started talking about intent. And then, of course, the ways that we targeted keywords started to change, right? So broad match changed and exact match changed, and like all of the sort of ways that we would target keywords sort of changed within search campaigns. And, the next evolution of that is that they're going to go away entirely, right? And that will be this continuation of more and more focus on machine learning based optimization, campaign builds, all of this kind of stuff. I really think that creative is one of the other ones at the bottom of funnel. Being able to upload sort of your own assets and just have multiple versions of that asset with, different copy and those types of things. We're not too far away from that. I think that all of these features are going to be really good at optimizing your advertising program for the bottom of funnel, not for mid and top. And I think that, to use a theme that I've used in this section, in previous episodes, there's going to be winners and losers there. There's going to be marketing teams that double down on just complete automated campaigns. And I think they're actually in a race to the bottom. And the marketing teams that realize that, hey, we need to invest in these automated campaigns, but we want to make sure that we're continuing to reach the rest of our target audience with well thought out creative that is trying to speak the right messages to the various stages of our consumer journey. Those marketing teams are going to win.
Yeah, I love that, Eric. And it's almost like you are reading my mind as you're going through that. But I have a very similar view of where I see things going. I think there is just going to be more and more prevalence of these automated campaigns in the marketplace. And keywords, yep, I think there's a timer attached to those. We've already seen keywords in and of themselves change over the course of the last few years. Exact is no longer exact. It is all around the feel behind those keywords that really matters. And again, like that's somewhat of a positive in my mind, that like it takes some of that heavy lifting off us, but it takes away some of that control. And like that control can feel quite nice sometimes, but it's uncomfortable moving through that change. So if I was to kind of put the crystal ball on and look at where we're at in 5 years' time, do we go back in time to where we're looking more at what is the content on the website? What is the content on the page to give the right signal to the algorithm around what sorts of user might be interested in this product? So it's kind of like full circle before paid search was even a thing, of going back to like more traditional SEO, if you will, of what is on that page, how can we try and find those right sorts of user. And then those ads are going to be placed within a whole host of different sets of inventory that are different than what we're all doing now. Will Google search still be the primary way that people interact with Google? Or is it going to be through your own Google Assistant? Gemini, for example. I'm doing a lot of searches through Gemini at the moment, and it's great. So Are there big scale changes coming? Like, yes, but there's always been big scale changes. So I'm not personally like scared about any of it. I think it's exciting. But again, you've got to be testing these new products and not be scared of them, but just come at them with a healthy skepticism, I think.
I'm scared for any marketer that's not curious.
But the curiosity, I think, is where you really find success. Because if you are curious about this new, shiny tool, if you will, there are going to be things you learn throughout that process, but you just need to go in with your eyes wide open and not be kind of sold the dream, because the sales teams can do that, right? But you need to go in and be very, very clear around what are the pitfalls and know what to look out for, and then clearly report back on what that campaign actually did for you.
There's really no playbook that's going to help marketers over the next 5 years to navigate through all of this. Mm-hmm. And that's exciting. I'm excited.
I agree. But that's just the story of marketing. Like, that's always been true. It feels like it's faster now than it's ever been for the changes, but it's just always been constantly changing.
Yeah. It's been nonstop.
We had no dad jokes this episode, and that makes me a little bit upset. But other than that, I think it was a good one. So thanks so much for joining me, friends. This has been The Hypothesis. Thank you so much for tuning in. For show notes or to get in touch, find us at thehypothesisshow.com or at Thrive Digital, both linked for you in our description box. And if you liked today's episode, we'd love if you'd rate and review wherever you're listening or watching. Thanks.